Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Enough to Keep Going podcast. It is Thursday, March 1st, 2018, I think. And so on Thursdays, we have our E2KGn30 show where we pick 6 to 9 of our favorite news stories from the past week, the ones that we find the most interesting, not necessarily the most impactful from the rest of the gaming media. So when we try to get out in 30 minutes, but this is E2KG, so that rarely happens. I'm gonna make a goal of it tonight. I am SwissGuard, and I am joined tonight by Agasicles Stamas. How are you, Agasicles?
I'm okay, except for the fact that we have a nor'easter, El Nino, derecho, storm of the century, polar vortex thing moving in. So who knows? So tonight we podcast, but who knows what tomorrow may bring. So I think you'll also be in the crossfires of that.
Yes.
Swiss, so
we are not. We don't live that close to each other, but we are in the same state. So and yes, the local news has been warning people to charge their cell phones ahead of time because power might be lost. And I remember there was a derecho, must have been 5 or 6 years ago, if you remember that one.
It was 2012 because it was the year my oldest daughter was born.
Okay.
And I remember bunkering down in the basement bathroom because shortly after the derecho there were also tornado warnings all over the place. So yeah.
Right. We were out of power for a week that time, so hopefully this won't be too bad. All right. So internet sleuths, you can cross-reference the weather report and maybe try to pinpoint where Agasicles and I may be residing. Or we can just, jump in and talk gaming, which is probably more interesting. So the first story I have, and it is from Eurogamer, and the headline is, "Oops, Sega released Yakuza 6 for free." And I always love these stories that imply the overworked and hyper-stressed software engineer accidentally releasing to prod something that should not have been included. So the crux of the matter was Sega wanted to release Yakuza 6, a demo. Well, it was labeled as a demo, but as the article notes, the trial version is 30 gigabytes. So it's a 30 gigabyte download. You go on, you can purchase the full game after the fact, and you kind of just pick up where you left off. So they're like, oh, you won't even have to, it won't even be a hiccup. You just give us your credit card information and you'll be on your merry way. Well, apparently in Europe and Australia, everything was cool. You get to a certain point in the demo and they're like, okay, if you really want to continue, you're going to have to pay. In North America, that little gate did not exist. So some people were able apparently to start moving on and progressing in the game. And so there were some tweets out there saying, yo, if you have Yakuza 6 demo, disconnect your PS4 from the PlayStation, from the internet, and Sega won't pull your game, because Sega, of course, figured out the problem and pulled the demo from the PlayStation Store. In their they put out a tweet statement. "We apologize, but we've had to remove Yakuza 6, the Song of Life demo from the PlayStation Store. We are as upset as you are, and I'd hoped to have this demo available for everyone today. We discovered that some were able to use the demo to unlock the full game." So as of, I guess, this article came out yesterday. I did not see an update whether or not they've uploaded the demo again. But yeah, that happened.
Yeah, so Swiss, you mentioned that it sounded like you were a bit regarded the premise maybe of the post that this happened because of human error and because of somebody being overworked and tired and pushing right up to the deadline for the release of the demo. Do you take umbrage to that perspective, or?
I have sympathy for it. So, I mean, this is the only way I can see it happening, because obviously there were multiple versions of the demo, which makes sense for the different regions, but that part of the code you would have thought would have been synced properly. So there was some version control snafu somewhere where the proper settings were not applied. And you and I have both been in the software world, are in the software world, and we know that most a significant portion is just combating human error, because
right. And that's why I wanted to ask if you did have a detraction from that opinion. I mean, I get it, and I too sympathize and empathize, and I can see it happening that way. But then I guess I would love to eventually get some insight and into how does Silicon Valley do those things, and are they a world apart from the rest of software engineering, right? And I know that there are some practices that are. I've gotten different impressions talking to different game developers, right? I've gotten the impressions of things just being done willy-nilly and just throwing code hand over fist.
Wild West. Yep.
Right, but then I've also talked to some who talk about, hey, that's one of the major maturations that I made in my career was coming to understand why process is important. And I know from my own perspective, pushing stuff to prod, unless you are a highly skilled, highly organized DevOps organization, is not something that I entrust to one person doing by themselves at 11:59 p.m. on the release date. Right? There's checks and balances. There's additional people to put their eyes on it.
Well, there should be, but
yeah.
I think when I say I sympathize, I don't necessarily mean I think it's all cool and oopsie daisy, and it's emblematic of a process problem. But as you and I both know, when deadlines approach, what's the first thing you start to jettison? And it's I don't care, just get it done mentality, and that's dangerous. But I think it's realistic to.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, you and I have both been in situations, right? We've both also been on the other side of the situations where we went from a just get it done mentality to no, we're not doing it unless we know that it's right. So, so it would just be interesting to get some insight into that. But such as it is, yep. Sega, not a small mom and pop shop software development organization, right? You would think that they would have available personnel and insufficient process. And I'm not saying that I expect them to be infallible. I'm just saying it's curious to me, and I would love to be the fly on the wall and know, how the sausage is made in terms of if you're the No Man's Sky development studio where it's a bunch of people working out of their bedrooms, right? That's one thing. If you're Sega with this legacy of decades and decades of software development,
right? There should have been some level of maturity there.
Or you just want to know what the difference is, but yeah.
All right. So our next story you have, and it's more of a social story. Yeah,
so very social, as it's about Facebook, right, which is one of the biggest social media companies out there. So my first story, I found this over on Game Informer, actually. Facebook launches a Women in Gaming initiative. So this is a platform launched by the company to try and increase the numbers of I'll say women in games, but I think at the end of the day, this is all about diversity and inclusivity, right? Trying to get different mindsets and minority mindsets into the game development space at a percentage that is representative of their consumption, right? I think this is an area that I don't frequently get into arguments about it, but when I hear people expressing counter opinions, many is the time that they're basing it on things that aren't really the point. And I think on a large scale, a lot of these things are about trying to say that if everything were equal and everything were balanced the way it should be, then a given company's employee demographic should largely be reflective of the population of the United States, right? More to the point in this space, game development shops, particularly very large game development shops, for the betterment of your own product, you would want to reflect the demographics of those people purchasing it. So as the percentage of women increases in the demographic of those who consume games, at some point it becomes bad business to not have a representative demographic and mindset producing your games, because you're going to start missing chunks of the market that are available for you to plunder. So what they talk about as part of it, there's a social media hook to it where they're using the hashtag #SheTalksGames, and that's a video series with a lot of female creators. I think that that's particularly interesting just because I love to see and hear creators talk again about how the sausage is made. On a family topic, we recently watched. I want to say it must be the end of like Monsters Inc. or something, which we purchased on Amazon Prime, so it would be available for our kids to watch all the time. And at the end, it's really awesome that they have this series of interviews of people from, I think it's at Pixar, because I think that's a Pixar movie, and it's people of all different walks of life talking about how they got into that industry. And what they enjoy about it. And that is one of the most inspiring things to see. And a lot of them were women, and it was an awesome thing for my kids to be able to watch and see. So again, associated with this is a video series of people within the gaming industry at all different levels. So executives, human resources, that's another thing. A lot of times when you do get to peek behind the curtain, we always say we want to hear from the engineers, and then we hear from the engineers, but we also don't hear from anyone else. So this series includes people in HR, art, programming, and design. There are additional organizations, the Women in Games organization, the European Women in Games organization, to set up conferences and events to try and kind of get the word out on the street and just show young women who are up and coming. Again, a lot of what's wrapped around diversity from a strategic aspect is the notion that if you don't see somebody who likes you in a position of success, then it's difficult for you to ever formulate or conceptualize that is a path that you can go down. So this is an effort to show young women who are coming up that there are other women in industry that they can identify with and perhaps be encouraged to seek a path in game development. So I thought that was pretty awesome.
As far as that's concerned, yeah, I think that's the positive way to look at it. Like you said, visibility and being able to form, I don't want to say a relationship, but a positive inspirational connection. I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is. Have almost like a mentor goal, so that you can continue. I will push back a little bit on the notion that businesses need to the makeup of businesses need to reflect the population at large. Now, I heartily agree that a business, by having a wide array of voices and experiences and whatnot, it's better from a marketing perspective. You don't want to be pinholed into, one perspective. But I don't like the idea that men and women have for like the exact same interest. So I saw some studies recently, and it was kind of interesting. So I got this from the Atlantic, and it was so this is kind of more generic STEM. So I figured that, you know, video game industry is, you can kind of figure it as a STEM industry, and this is kind of on the wider problem at large in society. But like math skills, right? So it says, and like I said, this is an article of the Atlantic. When it comes to math, the picture is grim. Jordan, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates are the only 3 countries in which boys are significantly less likely to feel comfortable working on math problems than girls are. In all of the other countries, girls are more likely to say they feel, quote, helpless while performing a math problem. On the test, though, it's basically equivalent. 2% girls lower than boys did. I mean, basically girls are better at math than they think they are, which goes to the whole point of showing, hey, yeah, you guys can, girls, you can do this, and look at these girls that are successful. But it goes on in talking about, well, okay, if girls and boys are the same, technically proficiently for the most, you know, effectively, why is there these disparities? And they're seeing disparities in some of the most socially progressive countries like Finland. You know, that has a really let's see, fewer than 25% of STEM grads in like Finland and Norway are women. And it's like, well, obviously Finland and Norway are promoting this, but why aren't women doing the STEM? And I think there's just like I don't know if it's cultural or however you want to describe it, but men and women are equal in dignity, but they're not the same. And there was this one professor, University of Cambridge, Simon Baron-Cohen. So he said, he basically has this whole book on the whole subject called The Essential Difference. And this is how he opens the book. The subject of the essential sex differences in the mind is clearly very delicate. I could tiptoe around it, but my guess is that you would like the theory of the book stated plainly. So here it is. The female brain is predominantly hardwired for empathy. The male brain is predominantly hardwired for understanding and building systems. That doesn't mean that women can't do STEM. It's impossible for them to do STEM, or that a man can't be an elementary school teacher. It just means that men are for Mars and women are for Venus, and there's an interest level there. So I don't think I don't like the idea that it's all due to like a good old boys club. And I think it's great that Facebook wants to show girls, hey, this is something that's very cool, and you can be and you can get into this, and it'll be awesome. And you know, I'd like my daughter to get into STEM stuff. But it's just, I don't know. I guess what irked me a little bit was how the article that you referenced, like the author ended it, because he was kind of snarky about the whole thing. You know, he's like, there are a lot of people who are going to pretend this sounds pseudo-intellectual by parroting, we'll just hire the best person from the job. And he kind of just does a little bit of virtue signaling there, and I didn't appreciate that. But on the whole, I like the fact that Facebook is doing it. Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's, so I'll take a little liberty to wind up making us late just to talk about it. I guess the concerns I have with those types of pushbacks are there are lots of vectors where I think they inference and suggest things that are problematic, right? One of those is if I'm talking about minorities and I'm not talking about perceived gender differences, right? Mm-hmm. Then my question is there a supposition that African Americans' minds were hardwired for manual labor versus intellectual pursuits, right? And that, obviously, I would have a problem with that consideration. But the other thing, I guess maybe from a larger aspect I have, is that there's a certain part where a certain vector based on evolution should be injected, right? That makes sense when you're talking about, you know, prehistoric man, right, Neanderthal, and the emergence of Homo sapiens, because those were the roles that they were assigned. But I think we all know, we all believe that as humans take on different roles and evolve over time, that those things should yield some differences. And I guess my concern is, to a certain extent, the question is what is instantiated in the system that allows that increased diversification, right? So if we accept as a premise a gender-based scientific difference in how the female mind and the human mind functions, that doesn't matter to me when a woman shows up at an interview, right?
Right. It shouldn't.
Right. So the question is as is the case in all of these topics of diversity, is, what actions do you take there at the interview, and then also how do you tunnel back to try and course correct any differences that are culturally or societally based or driven, from the aspect of, one of the things that we talk about in diversity with African Americans is that you go back and you look at the demographic and historically where people wind up living geographically. Most African Americans do not live geographically within places where they can easily gain access to swimming facilities. So, we like to joke and we like to talk about, well, African Americans can't swim well. Well, no crap, right? When a large percentage of the African American population doesn't get exposure to swimming, right? And so one of the things that had to be done where I went to college, because there was a swimming test involved, is you had to set up structure to make it available for people to compensate for that societally and culturally driven shortfall that most African Americans show up at the start of that curriculum, right? Then you create opportunities to give them the chance to work at that so that they can improve. So part of the, I guess, problem or question that I see, my question is again,
what are game companies doing to?
Right. So a very good, so a question, one of the things we would tackle at the company you and I worked at is, where are we recruiting, right? Mm-hmm. If we're only going to colleges that have a majority male population, then we should not be surprised that we have a diversity problem with an in-proportionate number of male employees, right? So the question then becomes, okay, are you going to recruit at all girls' schools, right? Are you going to recruit at historically Black colleges, right? If you're, so those are just the types of things that.
Yeah, and those I think are they're very prudent steps, you know. So it's I think, I guess what bothers me about a lot of these stories is sometimes there isn't as much nuance in the discussion.
Right, or maybe there's a hidden agenda. And just to bring it back to what your concern of what I said is, companies need to, that to me is a business statement. That is not and yes, there's some altruism to it of feeling that that's what fair looks like, right? Or that's what is, to a certain extent, that's the baseline for a meritocratic organization. My concern, and the reason I voice that, is because if I own a company, that's what I want to drive to, right? Because PR is a mother, right?
Right. You want to have the broadest demographic that you can appeal to possible to sell the most widgets.
Yes, based on my belief that that's what drives you to the best products, right? When you do things like that, you don't get things like Google mistaking African Americans for gorillas, right, in their face recognition algorithm, right? You don't get Face ID that can't recognize Asians, right? You don't get products that make assumptions and don't take into account what happens when a woman uses this, right? It's go back to software engineering and systems engineering 101, right? If I don't design use cases that cover the exceptions and the misuse and the abuse cases, right, then I'm going to wind up having an escape. So,
all right.
right.
I think we could go. Well, this was. I like having discussions, which is why we're on the podcast. But I think we have to move on and
absolutely.
Hit some other stories.
Yep.
But these should be quick. So next story, Horizon Zero Dawn. I got this also from Eurogamer. Horizon Zero Dawn shifts a whopping. They use shift. I thought that should have been ship, but I don't know. A whopping 7.6 million copies. So it is officially the best-selling first-party franchise, like their best-selling quote new first-party franchise on the PlayStation 4, and they kind of wanted to announce this in conjunction with the 1-year anniversary of the game, which we have another article on that here in a second. But from Guerrilla. Herman Hulst is the CEO of Guerrilla Games. We had a huge ambition for Horizon Zero Dawn, and as we approached the launch, we knew people were excited. But to see the sales of this volume is truly mind-blowing. So it's one of my pretty much favorite games of the year, and it's probably creeping up my all-time list. It's never going to reach the light heights of Ocarina of Time or Metal Gear Solid for me, but it's definitely one of those games that I'm going to appreciate having played and come back to. So yeah, they took a gamble and did something new, and instead of having kind of a first-person shooter amidst a sea of first-person shooters, they took a little bit of a, I don't know if you want to call it the blue ocean strategy from Nintendo, because first world, these action RPGs aren't terribly unique, but they did roll the dice a little bit, and it paid off. So we can just roll this into the next story too, if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I looked at just my own comment on this, like, what an amazing team story, right? Guerrilla Games, kind of the unrecognized darlings of the PlayStation ecosystem, right? I mean, they were there on PlayStation 2. They developed the Killzone franchise. It was kind of the only real big FPS franchise on PlayStation platforms. Never really measured up in mindshare to Halo. I would say, across a broad spectrum of opinions. But they worked hard at that franchise, and they were good games. And I felt like a lot of times they just didn't get their due. They decide that they want to do something else. Sony is a very can sometimes be an unforgiving environment for a game development studio. So it's just nice that they got the chance that they earned the chance to go off and do something completely different. And really not something that really the rest of the industry had done in terms of the particular way in which they put the parts together. Mm-hmm. And it just paid off. And like you said, was one of the best games of last year. So,
and the really, well, I'll save this comment for after you mention the story.
All right, so my tag-on story is over on GameSkinny. Horizon Zero Dawn to celebrate anniversary with a Reddit AMA this Friday. So tomorrow, hopefully they're doing this out on the West Coast so that they are not struck by the polar vortex, perfect storm, derecho event tomorrow. But on Reddit, the voice of Alloy, Ashley Birch, and the game's leading writer, Ben McCaw, will be participating in an AMA on Reddit, so you can ask them questions. As Swiss mentioned, it is to commemorate the 1-year anniversary. They say it was released in February of 2017. In this article, I think obviously since the AMA is tomorrow, it was actually, I believe it was released in March. I think Resident Evil 7 was the February release, and then maybe 2 weeks later, I thought was Horizon Zero Dawn. But I could have that wrong, but I think it's actually a March game. Small difference, but yeah, so that should be pretty interesting to hear from them.
We talk, Sausage Factory. I'm eager to hear some of the backstory, and I thought Ashley Birch did a fantastic job. I have a crush on Aloy, so what was cool about Horizon Zero Dawn was I think that they just opened like to the entire studio for idea pitches. And I don't think it was some high person that came up with this initial idea. And it was just like one of the designers or programmers or something that was like, dude, we should do post-apocalypse fighting robot dinosaurs or something, or like very simple. And they ran with it. And I'm hoping this comes out in the AMA more background on from the lead writers, especially on okay, what was the seed, and then how do you take like that seed and run with it and build this whole world with all the lore, because they have the different factions in the game, and so it was it'll be interesting.
Right.
Have you ever?
Right, as you mentioned, right, and this is a lead writer who's got to propagate an idea, whatever the origin is, but they're trying to pull this off in a company and a culture that has been steeped in doing first-person shooters. And Killzone always had kind of a story behind it, but it's still interesting. I would say that Horizon Zero Dawn is still more heavily steeped in narrative than Killzone was. So here you are at this company that has its identity is kind of heavily coupled to first-person shooters, and now you're trying to build this highly narrative-based third-person action game that is far and away. I mean, I don't know that in terms of game design that two games could be more different than the Killzone approach versus Horizon Zero Dawn. And again, I have a lot of respect for Killzone, but the sheer complexity of systems that had to be built for Horizon Zero Dawn to make it work appropriately together significantly exceeds, in my opinion, what Killzone was. So pretty interesting. I don't know that I'll be available for that AMA, but I'll definitely be interested to hear the debrief of it once it's all said and done.
I'm sure that'll be spread throughout the gaming web spheres after the fact, so should be able to take a look at it. Next story. Nintendo. Yay. This is from GameSpot. Nintendo launches user reviews, but removes them right away and doesn't explain why. So we have another software. This is how my mind works. I jumped to a software program DevOps thing again for this one, and basically, Nintendo quietly added functionality to its website that allowed users to submit game reviews, but it didn't take long before Nintendo reversed course. Message on a game page on Nintendo's website now explains that quote, or that customer reviews have been removed from all pages across as the company quote evaluates this feature and its functionality. So I don't know if they were planning on doing this and it got prematurely released, which would be a DevOps problem, or it almost, based on that statement, maybe it's not a DevOps problem. It sounds like a management problem, i.e. one team thought it was a good idea and they did their dots and I's and crossed the T's and released it. And then a shadowy Nintendo high-level figure appeared and said, nope, thou shalt not do that. Get that stuff off the website. We're not doing that yet. So
yeah, and one of the things going on inside Nintendo, and it's being encouraged from the top, is this kind of transition between the older legacy leadership to the reinvigoration of the company by taking on some of the thoughts and opinions of some of the younger generation of leadership. And yeah, I wonder too. I mean, that's kind of how we got Zelda, right, which skews away from the historical, heavily Eastern influenced game design and incorporates some Western design elements and some other things that we're seeing in Nintendo. Yes, this could have definitely been a team underneath a manager who is part of kind of that forward-thinking next generation group, who may not have asked permission first, right? Took the opinion to ask forgiveness later, and then once upper executives and senior management got wind of it, they were like, no, we're going to do some other stuff that we're getting your guys' opinions and thoughts on, but opening it up to publicly hear the opinions of of our customers in a space that is searchable and persistent is not what we want to do.
Yeah, the article says that the actual feature, I mean, somebody thought about it. It wasn't just thrown together. In order to review a game, you had to log at least 2 hours of gameplay in it. So, I mean, it wasn't like Amazon reviews where, people go in there and just put 1 star on, authors they don't like or whatever. But,
or opinions on products that they don't actually own.
right. Or, voting on a game or on something that's, not released yet. But, so I'm kind of curious to see when Nintendo's online service comes, how quickly or if this will be reenacted. All right, so the last story of the night, and it's on a new game coming up.
Yeah, it's a solid release date, so I think some people will be excited about this. So, Detroit Become Human, which is the upcoming game to be released by Quantic Dream, I think that's the name of the studio. Yeah, Quantic Dream, who is the studio behind. Now I'm forgetting the names because they're the studio behind a lot of games that I haven't played. So they're behind whatever the big story game was on PlayStation 3, which now
Heavy Rain,
yes,
Beyond Two Souls,
yes,
the last two games they've done.
Yes. So they nailed down a release date of May 25th. I find this particularly interesting because I come from the older generation of gamer before the industry went to a model that was heavily steeped around releasing every big title in the holiday season. That typically being what we consider from the release of that year's version of Madden through the end of the year. Over the last few years, kind of going into the tail end of console generation 7 and definitely in console generation 8, we have seen the industry slowly get back to that pre-holiday deluge mentality. So from my perception, from like 1999 through the first years of console generation 7, you would see games released kind of peppered and distributed out throughout the year. When we got into console generation 7, so I would say kind of 2007, I would say, once all three consoles of that generation had been released, was when we definitely started to see like every major AAA game that really mattered was all being released in the holiday season. Like I said, and as we've come back around into 2014-ish, we're starting to see them peppered back out. I like this release date because this is what lands in what I call the Memorial Day release season. I distinctly feel like there's kind of four. There's the holiday season, but then there's the spring break releases. There is this Memorial Day summer releases because publishers want to put things out for people to play as kids head out on summer break from school. And then there's kind of a back to school release session right before the holiday season starts. And it's a few games that are released that people grab as they head back to college or as they've built new machines for the upcoming school year, or as they want to get in their last big binge of gameplay right before they have to go back to school. So I like how this lines up. This winds up coming out the Friday of the Memorial Day weekend because Memorial Day is on the 28th. So people either have time off or will take time off. A lot of people will use some of their PTO and stuff to make it into a 4-day weekend. I will probably try and pull that off myself. And if this is a game you've been looking forward to, you can certainly do that. And you'll have a nice, beady, chunky game to dive into over the Memorial Day weekend. I'm not sure what else is coming out around that time.
I haven't looked at a release calendar in quite some time. I'm kind of in like my backlog bunker mode until E3.
Right.
We'll see.
That's another thing. That's another good point is that will wind up having this release. And I haven't looked at the E3 dates for this year. This will wind up having this game released 2 or 3 weeks before E3. We'll probably get another bump of notoriety. Of course, it'll be in amongst the noise of new games that are releasing, but still, excuse me. It's going to wind up dropping in close proximity to a the industry's major news conference, and we'll probably get a little more buzz and uptake then. The other thing that's interesting about this is that this firm release date gets announced in the midst of a lot of controversy that Quantic Dream is suffering through So they are a team that is based out of France, and in the French press, there has been a story of harassment and hostile work environment being pushed at Quantic Dream, which they have categorically denied. So I'm actually kind of amazed, surprised, maybe a little suspect that they're releasing this firm release date amongst that, because there is the potential that they're trying to get people's mind off of that by announcing the firm release date of the game.
So that's an interesting wrinkle to it. I was just kind of glancing at the article. The game definitely sounds ambitious. This is not one that's been on my radar, but it sounds like if they pull it off, that's going to be quite a sci-fi experience. So
yeah, no, I'm more interested in it because it's a little more gaming, right? Heavy Rain was kind of like a heavy narrative, kind of experiential game, kind of like a AAA kind of walking around simulator. But this one is more in the vein of actiony at like kind of the Deus Ex level. So with incredibly high production value, obviously. So I'm very interested to kind of see, as you mentioned, what they're able to pull off, and whether or not this becomes something that is on our playlist and in rotation as we head into the summer.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up the items on our agenda. Did you see any stories the last second that you wanted to plug really quickly before we sign off?
I think I'll just briefly mention some things that we were kicking around in our own chat session over on Flock throughout the day. So we wound up not putting them in the rundown, but of course there is a word. We typically tried not to cover a ton of rumors. I think all of us universally on the staff, that tends to not interest us as much. However, VentureBeat got a hold of a noodle that says that Battlefield this year is going to go to World War II. Normally, I wouldn't give that a lot of credence, but it is from VentureBeat, who has a pretty, their own personal demand to be relatively accurate news sources. So I thought that was interesting. And also this week, we got the word that Outcast was dropping on the Nintendo Switch. I was really surprised and amazed by that, as well as word that NVIDIA cards may be available as early as going into the summer. So it's been a pretty big news week, actually. There were a lot of things we chose not to cover tonight, but in addition to what we covered, there's that stuff out there. And my only other comment is, I know people, when they listen to this episode, and if they were watching live, might complain about the amount of time that we spent talking about the diversity thing and the Facebook push of getting women into the workplace in game development. My personal feeling was when we went into talking about it from an opinion perspective and not just, I think that topic, as well as several others that we've covered on both of the gaming shows, that topic is one that is important enough that I feel like, even though it doesn't necessarily fit into our agenda, that when it comes up and it goes down that path, I feel like we have to address it then. I don't like pushing those things off and saying, well, we'll talk about it on another show or another episode. So I realize that may not fit within some people's desire of what they wanted for the content. My suggestion would be fast forward a little bit if you want to skip it and get back to the news. But all of those topics are important things in our industry. And in this domain as a hobby, they're actually, at the end of the day, the things that are probably more important than just playing games. So I feel like we need to take the small windows that we get to address them and do that. So I apologize if anybody didn't like it, but I feel like that cuts more to the core of what we are as a podcast network. So hopefully everybody will be okay with that.
It's a discussion. I know we try to hit the news items, but we do add a little bit of commentary and our thoughts on each news item. So I don't think it was, maybe the length was a little bit longer than usual, but it's not completely out of the wheelhouse, I don't think, of E2KGn30. But as far as the graphics cards, it's not just any graphics cards. It's like a new line of graphics cards. So that was that story.
Yes, yeah, it may be a new architecture, which would be different than historical trends, but That is a topic we should discuss on another show.
All right. So we're about 45 minutes in, so we went over time, but that's what we usually do. If you've heard us before, you know it's kind of expected. All right. All right. So for Agasicles, I am SwissGuard, and please catch us on Tuesday evening for our next generic talk show, course show, where we will, I don't know what our topic's going to be yet. We'll pick something out this weekend and have 3 or 4 of us on for some lively game discussion. So until then, have a good evening and stay safe.